Okay, we're back. We're live. We're Hawaii, the state of clean energy, here on a given Monday, 3 to 4 o'clock. On Labor Day, I might add, celebrating Labor Day with Marco Mangelsdorf, who joins us by Skype audio from from Provision Solar in Hilo. We're talking today about HECO's response to the Public Utilities Commission, which came out on, about a week ago, and whether the media has been reporting accurately on it. And Marco, it's always great to talk to you. I really always feel a sense of clarity when I do, and you take us to new levels in understanding the sea changes in clean energy in our state. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Well, thank you very much for having me back. And speaking of Labor Day, Jay, it is truly, honestly, sincerely a labor of love to be spending this next hour with you, ferreting out the deepest recesses of the Hawaii energy picture.
Absolutely. We do it because we love it. No kidding. And, thank you to Zuri Bender, our producer here, who comes in on Labor Day and puts us together this way. Thank you, Zuri. Anyway,
You're
okay.
welcome.
I heard that. So, Marco, let's sort of lay the foundation of this discussion by telling people, what happened here. What was the confluence of events that brought us to this 2,700-page document that Hawaiian Electric issued last Monday. I want to say, what day was that? The 26th.
Well, I tell you, you probably know by now, Jay, that I'm a fellow who likes metaphors, both conceptually and also I like to use them in my writing. And to me, it's as if we have reached the big circus. As in, ladies and gentlemen, step right up and enter into the big tent, and boy, do we have things to share with you today. I mean, truly, the depth and breadth of the discussion over Hawaii's energy future, I think, has been bubbling along for quite a while, but now it's reaching more of a roiling boil, and the circus that we're in right now has many tents. In fact, one is the Hawaiian Electric Industries and Hawaiian Electric Company's tent, and then you have the Public Utilities Commission tent to the right of that, and then just down the causeway a little bit, you have the tent that has the advocacy organizations such as Earth Justice and the Sierra Club and Blue Planet Foundation, and then a little bit beyond that is another tent with the various solar and other renewable energy advocacy groups, the Hawaii Solar Energy Association, Hawaii PV Coalition. So we have definitely hit the big time in terms of the big circus, and there's just going to be so much to observe and so much to comment on. And it's going to be going on not just for months, but for years, as all these stakeholders chew on one or more of the 2,700 plus pages that were submitted to the PUC last week.
Okay, well, let's reel it back just one level. Can we explore exactly why Hawaiian Electric submitted this 2,700-page document?
Well, they were ordered to. They were ordered to by the PUC. There were 4 orders and decisions and orders that were issued by the PUC in late April as far as calling Hawaiian Electric to task for not adequately providing blueprints, shall we say, and ways forward in terms of integrating more distributed generation, as far as being able to bring the cost of electricity down, as far as more longer-term planning for the state's electrical energy production plan, at least as far as all the islands except the island of Kauai, which is the Kauai Island Utility Co-op. So they were responding to the marching orders they received in late April, and they were given 120 days to provide a substantial amount of responses, and that's in fact what they did with these 2,700 plus pages. They covered a tremendous amount of ground and trying to address things the PUC wanted them to address.
But let's get the tone of it. There have been various PUC orders in the past, 2 years or so, where they were punitive and threatening, I would say, to the utility. And it's a real question as to whether that was appropriate and deserved or not. And it seems to me, and I'd like your comment on it, is that these orders were really dramatic, and they were, what do you want to say? They were threatening, and they were of a tone that was punitive. What's all that about?
Well, I agree that some of the tone in those 4 documents from last April were rather harsh and taking HECO to task for a number of different things. And I think it, Jay, to me, the maximalist position of what a lot of people who should know better in this state have regarding distributed generation, and particularly rooftop solar generation, grid-tie rooftop solar generation, is that the utilities should essentially open their grids to any and all comers. There should be little, if any, obstacles and hindrances to people who want to go solar electric to hook up to the grid. And that just is not practically nor a possibility, nor is it something that we would even want to see, because that would be akin to essentially allowing a freeway to operate with no rules, no speed rules, no metering in terms of controlling the amount of people that can get on the freeway. And the grid is a public good that in this case, the primary responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility, is being held by the utility company to maintain that public good. So essentially, in my view, anything short of the utility company saying, we've been wrong all this time, you are right, submit whatever you want to submit, we'll hook you up, no questions asked. And of course, that's never going to happen, but that really, to me, is kind of the mindset of a number of stakeholders who, again, I believe should know better in terms of not taking the utility to task at every single instance when this maximalist position is not being met.
Well, it strikes me that over the past 3 years or so, you have a decline in the number of installations, and therefore a decline in the business to the PV installers. You have an increase in mainland PV companies coming into this market, putting even more pressure on the local PV installers, and the business is tightening, it's consolidating. There isn't as much of it as there was for a variety of reasons, and those guys have made a lot of noise in the legislature and with the PUC, sort of complaining against the Hawaiian Electric, making it the whipping boy for all these problems, and putting it in the name of you're not letting us connect. And I don't know the technology of it, but it strikes me that you can't let everybody connect. You said that a minute ago. If you do, then you put the system at risk. So you've got to find, in an almost experimental sense, because this hasn't been done before anywhere, what the margins are and where it gets dangerous, and you've got to take conservative, risk-averse, if you excuse that expression, risk-averse steps to prevent the system from coming down because too much is on it. We don't know as much as we would like to know about exactly how the grid works when you're hanging off all this distributed generation. And I understand that the engineers at Hawaiian Electric, they see their primary mission as keeping the lights on, whether we realize that or not. And I don't think we fully understand that they're sworn professionally to make sure the lights are on, and we tell them we don't really care about that. We want you to hook up every single photovoltaic that any photovoltaic installer wants to install. And I think the public is really not well informed on this, and somehow it has led to making HECO a target. It's taken 2 or 3 years to get there, but that's where I think we were when the PUC issued those orders in April. And in fact, when they hit the Hawaiian Electric last August, I think a year ago, on a very nasty opinion they wrote over interconnection in Maui. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Well, how do you feel about that? I mean, do you agree or disagree, or what's your thought on it?
Well, I think your points are well taken, and in the abstract, I do agree with what you're saying. On the other side of that equation, it's also important to take note that if my numbers are correct, somewhere around 4,000 homeowners, mostly homeowners, probably some business owners as well, but somewhere around 4,000 Hawaiian Electric customers on Oahu are essentially in limbo land. They're waiting. They have applied to get a system installed. They're waiting for approval. And 4,000, that's not just chump change. I mean, that's a substantial amount of people who are waiting. So I can fully understand the frustration that a homeowner who's seen, and you and I have talked about this before, who's seen half of his or her block go PV, and by golly, he or she has waited for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but now they're ready. They have the money, or they're convinced that it's not some type of shady smoke and mirrors technology, and they want to do it, only to be told, by Hawaiian Electric, well, thank you for your interest, and you're just going to have to wait. So I mean, the frustration is there. The frustration cannot and should not be just dismissed by any means. So I definitely feel that pain of folks who really want to go PV and ready to commit but haven't been able to do so. But I really do, I don't like at all, and it doesn't strike me as accurate, some of the things, for example, that the Star Advertiser editorial mentioned just yesterday as they were discussing their views on the documentation submitted by Hawaiian Electric, and one of the claims they made was that HECO is, quote, is as risk-averse as ever, close quote, as risk-averse as ever. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a company, and their subsidiaries of Hawaii Electric Light on the Big Island and Maui Electric on Maui. These are companies that have taken more distributed generation on a per capita basis than any other utility on the mainland, bar none. And how can having the highest penetration in the nation be considered risk averse? I mean, it doesn't hold water. And for just to mention one more thing about the Star Advertiser editorial, they note, quote, if HECO really expects Hawaii to become a national leader in clean energy adoption, it must be out front, innovating to overcome the technical barriers, close quote. That's exactly what they've been doing these past years. Not only are we number one per capita in terms of PV, we're also number 6 in the nation. This little tiny state in the middle of the Pacific, we're 6th in the nation last year in 2013 for the amount of megawatts, solar megawatts, that went online in 2013. So absolutely, is there farther that we all have to go, that Hawaiian Electric has to go? Absolutely. Have they admitted that? Absolutely. But it's just false, it's demonstrably false to charge that somehow HECO is risk averse and that we haven't done as much as we have done collectively, because we've done a whole heck of a lot. Again, to me, the debate really comes down to not where we want to go over the long run.
Well,
we're all pretty much.
Let me add a thought to that, Marco. We're going to have to take a break pretty soon, but just one thought is that I like risk averse. I think our society, and there's no exception, Hawaii, is dependent on electrical energy. In large part, that's because our society is dependent on the internet. That's where I come from. But I don't want my power cut. I don't want my power cut under any circumstances at all. It's more important that I get regular, reliable, consistent power, than pretty much anything. And I don't care that we be number 1 in the world on photovoltaic installations. We're making our progress, and we will get where we need to go. But all the clamor that's been raised about why don't we go faster and faster and faster does not, to me, overtake the notion of being risk averse. I want my utility to be risk adverse. So I welcome, that kind of attitude by the engineers who run the utility, old-fashioned style. They feel it's their obligation, and I do too, to keep the lights on. I disagree with the editorial, but not for exactly the same reason. I think we both disagree, but for different reasons. We're going to go ahead and take a break now. That's Marco Mangelsdorf, in Provision Solar, joining us by Skype from Hilo, Hawaii. And we're talking about Hawaii, the state of clean energy, as we like to do. And we're talking today about HECO's response to the Public Utilities Commission's orders, and is the media being accurate? We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, hello. My name is Hong Jiang, and I host ThinkTech Asia every Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. At our show, we talk about issues that are important in Asia, such as environment, culture, history, religion. We broadcast live, and we're also on Olelo 54. Make sure to tune in, and we'll see you there. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Marco Mangelsdorf. Provision Solar joins us by Skype from Hilo. We're talking about the state of clean energy and HECO's response to the Public Utilities Commission orders and whether it's being accurately reported on in the press. So, well, you know, of course, the press is going to try to sell newspapers, and little raw meat never hurt. And that's where we are, I think, and that's where we've been in many ways. That's one of the reasons why, Hawaiian Electric has become such a whipping boy. And it sells news. But I guess the question is, what do the people think? What's the average Joe in the street think? My dichotomy is that you can't have cheap prices and new technology at the same time, because new technology costs money. And if that's a smart grid, it costs money, and somebody has to pay for it. So you can complain about one, or you can complain about the other, but you can't complain about both. And that's what we have here. Do people understand the real economics?
Oh, I don't think so, Jay. I don't think so. I think it's much more driven by folks who are paying more for electricity than they would wish to pay, and they want relief, and that's come through, I think, loud and clear on so many levels, the PUC, the utility company, various interest groups, and the question is, how do we get there? How do we get to lower rates? And Hawaiian Electric has proposed a way forward. Now, is that going to be the way forward when all is said and done? Of course not. Of course not. I mean, the PUC will take as long as they need to take, along with holding hearings, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of input. And what the end result's going to be is kind of like you have a bill that's introduced in the legislature, and it turns into a sausage-making contest. You know, what's the sausage going to look like at the end of the day? And that's way too early to tell. But to go fundamentally to your question, it has to do with how much people are paying out of their pocket for their electric rates. And if, in fact, by raising the minimum customer charge, which right now, depending on what island you're on, is $20 plus or minus a few dollars, and raising that to $50 plus, is that going to, and commensurately, concurrently, reducing electric rates, is that going to lead overall to folks paying less out of pocket on a monthly basis for their electricity? I mean, that's really the promised land, where, because look, I mean, the vast majority of utility ratepayers in this state will be non-PV customers. That, to me, is a reality. Whether it's going to be 1 out of 10 homes that have PV, 2 out of 10 homes, 3 out of 10 homes, but it's not going to be a majority of homes that have PV. I'm convinced of that, at least not for a long time. So in the meantime, is it fair to have non-PV customers, utility customers, essentially subsidize the benefits that net energy metered customers are enjoying?
Explain how that works. Explain why why the utility is spending money out of my pocket, and I'm not a PV customer, in order to support the guys who have PV. How does that work?
No, excellent question, and let me address it in the simplest way I know how, which is that a net energy metered customer is receiving full retail credit. They're not being paid, okay, and that's a mistake that a lot of kind of newcomer reporters make, and even people who should know better. They're not being paid by the utility company. They're receiving credit for whatever PV power they're producing that is sent back through the utility wires for their neighbors to use or for somebody else to use somewhere in the grid. So whatever that retail rate happens to be, and on this island for this month, for example, or last month I should say for HECO, it was 41.64 cents a kilowatt hour, which is always higher typically than Maui, always higher by a chunk than Oahu. So for every kilowatt hour that you're producing that's being fed back into the grid, if you're net energy metered, you get full retail credit for that. How can any business stay in business if they are giving you credit for something that you are providing them at the same rate that they're charging you?
Well, apparently they're going to change that, right, Marco?
Right.
So now
That's
it's going to be
proposal,
a fraction of that.
But the point I simply wanted to make in response to your question is that if in fact they're doing that with a subsection, a minority amount of their ratepayer base who are net energy metered, that means that everybody who isn't getting that benefit in effect is subsidizing the utility to be able to credit net energy metered customers at the full retail rate.
Yes.
That's how it's coming out of your pocket.
Yes. Well, there's another way too. Let me see if you agree. And the pressure is on to build a smart grid. Gee whiz, we've heard about smart grid for at least 5 years. And you know, I always ask, so what do you mean by a smart grid? What is it? And I've come to the view that a smart grid is a combination of maybe hundreds of thousands of black boxes and rewirings and recalibrations and reorganization of the way the power is passed around the grid. And when you say smart grid, at least in today's conversation, you're really saying, make me a smart grid that will take all this distributed energy, where I can get my interconnect. Make me a smart grid that will accept all the interconnection applications that are out there. And I was thinking, you know, while you were talking about the cost to the non-PV customer is, if you raise up the level of technology on the grid to make it smart in order to take all this distributed energy, you're actually spending that money for the benefit of the guys with the PV. It doesn't do me any good. I don't have PV, but it does them a lot of good, and I'm paying for it.
Right, and again, to me, one of the key issues I think that Hawaiian Electric is trying to make that absolutely deserves to be made is one of the key issues is and the overall fairness principle that really, to me, underlies the idea of the necessity to restructure rates.
Yes.
Because the status quo is not sustainable. I mean, you can challenge the numbers. You can say, "Oh, I don't believe the numbers," but I mean, these are numbers that have to be vetted by a number of vetters, so to speak. But I mean, the utility, in effect, Hawaiian Electric, Maui Electric, Hawaii Electric Company, spent or lost, however, what verb you want to use, about $38 million in 2013, essentially in subsidizing net energy metered customers. You can say, "Oh, well, that's just chump change to them. You know, they made $200 million last quarter in profits," or whatever number you want to come up with. But I mean, to me, $38 million is not a trivial sum.
No.
So it is time after. Plus, get this. I mean, net energy metering has been here in Hawaii for over 13 years. And I know something about that because I actually, without trying to sound too much on my high horse, but I was the one who officially, my company was, to install the first official net energy metered system in August of 2001. So I have the timeline essentially from the beginning to where we are 14 years later. Mm-hmm. And it was not designed back then to be a program, a benefit in perpetuity. Just like the tax credits that have been around for 38 years in this state, in one form or another, in my opinion, are not designed to be a benefit to a particular segment of commerce in perpetuity. So the important thing, to me, one of the important takeaways is that with the PUC in late April saying, we find you guilty of essentially Hawaiian Electric of not doing A, B, C, D, all the way through Z, and you know, come up with proposals to make things right. That's what Hawaiian Electric did. This is their big document up essentially, which really is going to start this incredibly interesting dialogue. And like I used earlier, the metaphor of the circus for what is going to come out at the end in terms of how do we get to where we all want to go, but while not threatening the stability of being able to have power on whenever and all the time when we need it.
I don't know why it all falls on Hawaiian Electric. I mean, there are other organizations and institutions in the state that, you know, if there's blame around, they ought to take it, or at least some of it. I mean, for example, the administration has done, this current administration, the one leaving office now, has done very little to solve this problem. They have been, unavailable. And they may have done some rhetoric, but they haven't done any action. And then you have all the various other structures. The PUC itself, I mean, where's the leadership? It just strikes me from what you say is that these guys are all trying to paste it on HECO, but in fact, there's been very little leadership in the field, and everybody's trying to pawn it off on someone else. I don't have a sense of fairness about that.
Well, utility companies around the world are frequently the targets of people's frustrations and unhappiness because of higher rates that they want to pay. It takes a bigger chunk out of their monthly expenses than they'd rather be paying, and utilities often have challenges when it comes to being very good in terms of customer service, which I think, not to excuse them, but it's kind of part and parcel, comes with the territory in terms of large bureaucratic organizations. So they're easy targets. Utilities are easy targets, and to me, it's just counterproductive to have, for example, colleagues of mine who responded to what Hawaiian Electric submitted by saying things such as, quote, "It's another wolf in sheep's clothing," close quote, or another colleague who said this kind of proposal is dead on arrival. I find comments like that so incredibly, I mean, they're great sound bites for a reporter, right, who's looking for juicy quotes in their piece. But to me, comments like that, just it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't take us to where we want to go in terms of essentially a negotiated settlement that is going to move things where we want to move them. Perhaps not as fast, and I too, I mean, I feel the frustration as well as far as customers of mine or wannabe customers of mine who have been told by Hawaii Electric Company that we don't have an answer for you right now in terms of moving forward. And I've pressed my colleagues at the utility company hard in terms of, well, what are you guys doing beyond this rather bold-sounding, we want to triple solar in 16 years. I mean, I care a lot less about what's going to happen in 2030 than I do about what's going to happen next month or next 6 months or next 12 months. So to me, one of the really important takeaways from these documents is going to be what are going to be the near-term, not solutions, but fixes, near-term improvements that will allow these more 4,000 or so people who are waiting on Oahu and the similar lists on Maui and similar lists on the Big Island. What changes are going to allow these people to be able to go forward and to interconnect? And I'm cautiously optimistic that there are some of those near-term improvements which hopefully will be implemented in the next 3, 6, 12 months, which will involve new inverter technology and programming, which will allow the inverter, by the way, is the device that takes the direct current solar power and turns it into alternating current, which feeds into your distribution system and therefore feeds into the grid as well. But these inverters will become more sophisticated in terms of programming to be able to write out grid anomalies, and will effectively, this kind of techno mumbo jumbo, but what it means in the real world to me is that it should allow the electric utilities to be able to incorporate and accept more PV into the grid. So there's that near-term improvement. There's also the proposal to go back to a substantial number of the tens of thousands of grid-tie systems in the state in the HEI territories, and essentially whether they're 1 year old, 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, and reprogram those existing inverters to allow them to be more nimble and therefore allow the utility company to accept more PV. So, in the near term, which is what I'm a lot more concerned about than years from now, that's where my eyes and my focus are really right now in terms of, okay, what can you do for me now, guys? What are you going to be able to roll out next month, 2 months, 4 months?
Let's explore that after the break, Marco. It's Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar, joins us by Skype audio from Hilo. This is Hawaii, the state of clean energy, here on ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about Hawaiian Electric's response to the PUC orders and whether the media have been accurate in reporting on that. We'll be right back after this break.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live with Marco Mangelsdorf of Provision Solar, joins us by Skype audio from Hilo. And we're here on ThinkTech Talks on a given Monday, 3 to 4, talking about Hawaii, the state of clean energy, one of my favorite topics and one of his favorite topics. We're talking about Hawaiian Electric's response to the PUC, which came out on August 26th, and whether the media has fairly reported it. So, you know, I mean, it's 2,700 pages is a lot of stuff. You know, it reminds me, I suppose, in a left-handed way of that big, that big group, the IRP, was it?
Yes.
That met for years and years and years. They came up with all this stuff, and then the PUC sort of dished it. And so it didn't measure up, didn't qualify. HECO had wasted its time. Everybody, I think it was 60 people in that organization had wasted their time. And now we're involved again in a big thing, 2,700 pages. But I haven't read it, and I suppose nobody I know. I mean, if you read it, if you read part of it, I'd like to hear your thought as to whether there are ideas in there, Marco, that are, you know, tangible action point ideas that could be carried forward to actually solve these problems. And the problems are, what are we going to do about, you know, the net energy metering? What are you going to do about PV interconnection? What are you going to do about expensive prices?
Well, I think it's a foregone conclusion that net energy metering is going to be phased out. How soon it's going to be phased out, what the new regime is going to come after NEM is too early to say. But it is, I, along with a number of my colleagues over the past months, I think have kind of pretty much seen the handwriting on the wall. And I don't think that's where, if there's going to be some type of final stand made by the industry against what they feel the utility is doing in the wrong direction, I don't think it's going to be regarding net energy metering. So we've got to move to a new regime that's going to be fairer than the current one. I mentioned the inverter changes that can take place. I think that can certainly be more near term. As we've talked about before, and I know this is an interest of yours, energy storage on both the utility side of the meter, both at power plants and substations, and then you have storage on the customer side of the meter, which is going to be at individual households and businesses. So I think storage, you know, how soon storage can play a tangible role as opposed to kind of a novelty marginal role, I think that's going to be further out there, at least compared to the inverter changes and adjustments that can be made. But I think it's inevitable that storage is going to play a larger and larger role, but probably it's going to be a little bit further out there.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, of course, net energy metering, we've been talking about that, even you and me, for a long time, how it really wasn't fair to pay full retail. That just doesn't seem fair, and they should cut that. And I guess the first step is they're planning to cut that. They're not going to pay retail anymore to people who sell back to the utility with net energy metering. They also say they're going to triple the amount of PV interconnects in the next really short time, couple of years, is it?
No, the tripling solar at least is supposed to be they proposed by 2030.
So that's a way down the pike.
Yeah.
So how are they going to do that, with more interconnects?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be both in terms of utility scale PV in the megawatt range, and Hawaiian Electric is already has been moving in this direction.
Yeah.
And it's also going to be what I'll describe as rooftop solar. And when I think of rooftop solar, it's distributed generation distributed through utility territory rather than having these big solar farms essentially producing multi-megawatts. So it's going to be on both sides of the generation equation, both in terms of utility scale generation, also much more small scale site.
But what's new
generation.
about any of that? That's already happening, isn't it?
No, it is already happening, but they are projecting that will accelerate in a more robust fashion over the next 16 years. And I think that's pretty much a no-brainer. I mean, it's just a lot of people, and it's one of the things that gets the headlines, right, is, Hawaiian Electric says they're going to triple by 2030. Well, that's just like you were referring earlier to, what does the media grab onto? It's glitzy, gauzy statements like that catch the attention of editors and producers rather than the nitty-gritty. But I mean, we've already been adding in a robust and almost exponential way, at least these past 5, 6, 7 years, much more distributed generation PV over the past years. So this is just essentially saying, it's Hawaiian Electric saying that we recognize this has been happening, and we plan to support this happening on an accelerated basis in the years to come.
I would have assumed that myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything less in terms of saying, look, we got the message, we're planning to do more, and here's how we're doing it. I mean, it's really so interesting, just kind of taking the bird's eye view, that so many of the responses from the various interested parties, what I'll call the usual suspects, has been so predictable.
Yeah.
So predictable.
Now, what about the cost item? They also said, gee, I wish I'd looked at it more closely. Something about reducing the cost per kilowatt hour by 20% or something like that. How are they going to do that?
I can't say that I have delved deeply enough into the stack of papers, which I don't want to put my poor ailing printer through, because that would be cruel and unusual punishment. I'm one of these old-timers that, it's nice to be able to actually tactily have the papers in my hand and flip them over one by one rather than have to peer at the screen and scroll down.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to the whole thing about how are you going to build a smart grid. It costs money, at the same time, reduce the cost of a kilowatt hour. How do you do that at the same time? And of course, solar in general is not that cheap. You got to pay for it. And in fact, any clean energy is new technology. It's not that cheap. And I don't know what they said about geothermal or wind. Those are the other two, primary possibilities. It just seems to me that when you put something new online, you have to pay for it, and at the same moment you're going to reduce the cost. I don't know how you do that.
Well, and the money has to, like you said, Jay, I think you nailed it. I mean, the money has to come from somewhere, right? And it's either coming from the ratepayers, right, or it's coming from the shareholders, and perhaps a combination of the two. But I mean, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. You can't get to where you want to go from where we are now at no cost. I mean, that would be great if we could, but that's just not the way it works in the real world. So I think you're absolutely right that in terms of infrastructure changes, infrastructure improvements, the development of breaking technologies and cutting-edge technologies, that is not a cost-free exercise. And the question is then really becomes who's going to bear those costs and how is it going to be appropriately distributed amongst those who are going to be shelling out the bucks to do so. So it kind of goes to me to this logical fallacy that unfortunately far too many people have, which is that they want their public services. They want to be able to ride the bus when they need to. If they need health care, they don't want to have their bank broken by that. They want adequate police protection against the bad guys. They want to be able to call the fire department if they have a fire in their house. They want
they want to be able to turn the lights on in the morning. They don't want
to be able to
power
turn
failure.
the lights on in the morning and have their beer cold and their their ice cream adequately chilled in the freezer, and they don't want to have to pay more than whatever they happen to be paying. So, and they're all for, who isn't against lower taxes, right? Who wouldn't like to pay less to the government? But the disconnect being is that you can't pay less and get the same or more, typically in this world. Or if you can, I haven't figured out quite how to do that.
Well, that's a leader's
Yeah.
job. The leader has to come and he has to reconcile these apparently inapposite forces. Or she, sorry, thank you. But let me ask you this, Marco, and to me, just like to get a handle on this before we close. So, the PUC, in a kind of nasty way, issued these orders and said, you guys get out there on the mat and you answer all these questions and tell us what your plan is, because you haven't given us enough of a plan. We need more from you. So answer all these questions and come back to us by, ultimately August 26th. Okay, and they do. I don't think I think the jury's still out on the actual quality of that response, because I don't think the media has actually analyzed it yet. But we now have a big response. I mean, big in paper and probably big in in the cost and the thought that went into it. What happens now? So where is all this going here? It just seems like a tennis game where the ball gets, forgive me, the ball gets batted back and forth across the net. Where does it come to? Is the PUC now going to do something? Is this the way we do leadership, by playing tennis? Where are we on the continuum of finding, an adequate solution, of creating an adequate plan? Are we ahead? Did this help?
Well, let me give you kind of a political slant to that. I'm not going to directly address your question, because honestly I don't know, Jay, but let me tell you this, or make this observation to you. We know, of course, that Governor Neil Abercrombie lost. He got walloped in the primary to Senator David Ige, and he will be out of office by, if memory serves, the first week or so in December was when the transition is going to take place to the next governor, whether that's going to be Mr. Ige or Mr. Iona, Mr. Hanneman, or Mr. Davis. We don't know yet, of course, right? Interestingly, the chair of the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, Hermina Morita, who I think very highly of, she is a holdover appointment because the governor declined earlier this year to nominate her for an additional full term. So Hermina Morita is chair of the PUC under a lame duck governor who declined to nominate her for a full term as a PUC chair. So how is that going to play out in the months to come? Will her position be stable enough as a holdover appointment under a lame duck governor, or will something more dramatic take place in the next several months before Mr. Abercrombie leaves office? So, and keep in mind that the Hawaii PUC is all of three individuals. There's Hermina Morita, my friend Michael Champley, who I also think very highly of, and Lorena Kiva, who I don't know personally, but there are three great people there as far as I know as PUC commissioners. So you've got these three individuals, and they're very hardworking and usually overworked staff who are going to be grinding through these 2,700 some odd pages and trying to come up with something of a response. But now that the ball is on their side of the court, with their chair being in this not so stable place of being a holdover appointment under a lame duck governor. So how do you factor that in to what's going to go on?
I don't know how you factor it in, but I think you have to factor it in. I mean, this is a moving target, okay?
Very much moving, very much. And I mean, you look at another thing that's important to solar contractors like my company and others is, and we've talked about this from time to time in the past, the feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff. I mean, what's going on with that? Well, nothing is. I mean, it's been in the deep freeze since October of last year, and I can only imagine that with this 2,700 pages now in the course, now in the court of the PUC. Is that going to mean that that the FIT program Rev 2 2.0 is going to continue to be in the deep freeze for who knows how long? I mean, there's just so much before these three commissioners in terms of important issues, not just, of course, renewable energy, telecommunications, transportation, everything that they have domain purview over. But I mean, what interests me, of course, the most is energy. And there's just so much on their plate right now, probably to an unprecedented, at least as long as I've been in the state, which is 14 plus years now living full time, an unprecedented amount of heft and dishes to choose from on their buffet table.
Yeah. Well, you know, they say we made a lot of progress, and in some metrics we have made a lot of progress, but we seem to be in a place where we're a little stuck for the lack of resolution of so many issues. And it's always good to talk to you about them. I think, you know, you're right. We're going to have a change in the new administration, whoever it is. And hopefully that administration will address and take leadership on these particular issues and try to get resolution going forward, bring the parties together. You know, they can talk to each other, actually. But what's interesting to me, last question for you, Marco, is if that is likely to happen, why hasn't this whole issue been a campaign issue?
Oh, that's juicy. I think it's because there are other more important issues that have been crowding it out, and it'll be really interesting to see as we move to the general election in the first week in November. So now we're essentially 2+ months out, now that we're September 1. What's going to be really the dominant themes and the dominant arguments amongst the gubernatorial candidates? And honestly, I mean, I'm struggling right now in terms of something immediately coming to mind as far as what's going to be the kind of hot red button issues amongst the gubernatorial candidates for the next couple months. I mean, what's your head?
I don't know. I would sure like to see somebody tackle energy, but you know, nobody is really an incumbent at this point, and everybody comes at it from a different point of view. And maybe, Marco, it's really, really complicated. I mean, from every point of view, from political, social, technological, you name it. And that's why it's important that they all listen to you and me when we have this conversation.
Then we can be legends in our own kind.
Marco Mangelsdorf of Provision Solar joining us by Skype audio from Hilo here on ThinkTech Talks, talking about Hawaii, the state of clean energy, talking about Hawaiian Electric's response to the orders of the Public Utilities Commission and how that has been treated in the press. Thank you so much, Marco.
Always a very great pleasure, Jay. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care. We talk soon. Aloha.